Welcome to AgriMinds, the podcast where we explore the intersections of personal growth and professional success in the ag industry. I'm Kacee Bowl, your host. Thank you for joining me as we dive in to the different strategies and insights that will help you level up your life and career. From mental health to leadership development, we're going to cover it all. So sit back and get ready to grow with AgriMinds. Welcome to another episode of the AgriMinds podcast. Today, I have Greg Martinelli with me. He and I connected, probably 5 years ago or something like that. And I've just been following along with some of the work that he's been doing. And I thought I've got to have him on the podcast. Greg does a lot of training in the agriculture sales space. And so today we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. And so get ready to take some notes, buckle up, and join us as we dive into the professional side of the AgriMinds podcast. Greg, welcome.
Kacee, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be on here, and I thank you for bringing me to your audience, and hopefully we can give them a whole bunch of stuff that they can at least think about and get some ideas and maybe scratch the surface of some ideas that will help them in their journey as being professional salespeople or just ag professionals in general. So yeah, glad to be here.
Thank you so much for being on. Yeah, I'm really excited about it. And so just for people who may not have any idea who you are, would you go ahead and just introduce yourself and tell people what it is that you do?
Sure. Absolutely. So 30 years ago, I got started in the ag business as an employee. I went to the University of Missouri and got an animal science degree, and then spent about 30 years, coming up on 31 in the ag business, primarily in sales and sales management. And so about 7 years ago, 2016, I had the opportunity to take that big leap, as you talk about in some of your posts that I see out there of, are you scared to take that leap? Do you need somebody to help you with that? I jumped out into the night and started my own business doing sales training. Originally, I started out, I was going to do speaking. I love speaking. I got asked to speak a lot as a nutritionist, as a feed salesperson. And then when I left and started my own service, it just kind of naturally fit. I thought, well, I'll go out there in the world and do that, and realize that there's other opportunities, and we'll talk about some of that, but I ended up getting into a lot of training and individual and group coaching, masterminds, and all the different things that went on with that. And so managed my way through COVID like all of us did in some way, and turned our businesses into what they are today. So glad to talk about that. But that's kind of where I'm at. I bounced around primarily in the Midwest with my years as an employee. But now in this role, I pretty much coast to coast in the U.S. and quite a bit in Canada, as far as that goes. And then, of course, virtually, those groups are going all over the world, which is kind of fun to think about. So,
yeah, it sounds like you have dipped your toe in a lot of different areas, and you're kind of feeling out where that flow is taking you. And I think that intuition is so cool. We'll touch on that a little bit more in just a second. But how in the heck, let's dive into this. How did you go from nutritionist to entrepreneur in the coaching, speaking, sales training field? What did that actually look like? Can you break it down and kind of share with folks, was there something going on in your life that said, you know what, I want to leave this route and go here? Or had that been on your heart for a while? Talk me through that particular season of transition.
Absolutely. It is a big, it's a big part. And I think it's something that your audience can really connect with if they're listening and they follow your posts. And a lot of what your posts are about is what I was like in my late 20s and 30s. I always wanted to have my own business, but was never brave enough to take that leap. And, when you are in your 30s, even in your 40s, the money treadmill is going pretty fast. You got kids going in college, and to take that leap is a pretty big risk. My wife worked, but we bounced around with our company, so she didn't necessarily have the ability to set roots down. The work from home thing wasn't nearly what it is today. And so the career wise, it was not a place where I could do that. So we got into our early 50s and had the opportunity. Kids are grown and gone. I always still wanted to do it, but I never really knew exactly what I wanted to do. And the opportunity came when I was going to get moved again And we were in at that time we were living in St. Louis. Both our parents were elderly at that time and getting ready to go into nursing homes, and so we wanted to live near them. And our kids were grown and moving around the country themselves, so we couldn't settle with them, and we decided to settle there in St. Louis and not take the move and make the jump into the entrepreneur world. And as I, necessity or need or getting hungry kind of drives your decisions sometimes. And I thought, how am I going to go out here and make money at what I know how to do and what I like to do? So it's always that circle, what do you like to do? Well, that's great, but what will people pay you to do? And so when I left, I really, as a sales manager, I had gotten involved in bringing in speakers and trainers and people to train my sales teams. And I worked around some national meetings. And so I knew there was an organization called NSA, National Speakers Association. And so my first thing was of course, Googled, how do you become a speaker and how do you go out here and set the world on fire and be the next, public speaker? And I knew there was some people that focused on ag, but not a lot. So I looked at it as I'm going to conquer this the same way I conquered my sales territory, which was you got to figure out why people want to hire you for whatever it is or why they want to buy from you. And so, as I developed my sales career, I always tried to be differentiating. How am I going to be different? Because there's a lot of competition, and I found there was a lot of that in the speaking world. The next thing I found was that there are some extremely talented speakers in the world, and NSA, the National Speakers Association, is full of them. And when I got out there, I realized, hey, this is not going to maybe fill the paycheck up for the whole year. So I'm going to have to jump in and do multiple lines of income. And that's one of the biggest points that I got. I went to my first meeting. It was a local meeting in St. Louis. They have local chapters and a national. And one of the first ideas I heard from somebody there, and I knew I was in the right place, was they talked about multiple streams of income. And they're like, if there are some people back in the day that could just go out and speak, and that's all they did, and all their money came from speaking. And this is 2016. So they're like, but things happen. There was recessions, the 2008, there was the 2001 attacks that caused meetings to basically end. Nobody was traveling. And so the speaker at that meeting said multiple lines of income, multiple streams of income when you're in business like this, because you don't know which one you're going to really like or which one's going to just hit it just right. And so that's kind of how I ended up thinking, okay, I've done a lot of coaching in my sales career, and I've done a lot of training. I'd been involved in the training aspect with my company and on my own as well. And I always loved being able to bring new ideas to younger people and people that are trying to develop and try to learn, and just sharing my lessons that I had learned and applying those specifically to an ag audience.
That is so good. What I don't think many people realize is that sales is everything. It doesn't matter what role you're in, it doesn't matter what industry you're in. You are selling something, whether it is you to try and convince a client to work with you, to be hired for something, to convince your spouse to do something. Like that's kind of what sales is. And so I just think it's such a powerful art that if you can just understand like the psychology behind the sales process,
sure,
you can do anything. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It's everybody's selling. It's kind of the one thing that I preached. You're selling somebody on your resume, or you're selling them on to buy your products, or you're selling somebody to give you a raise or to give you money. And I was part of my business in my business life. We tried to convince somebody to give us $15 million to build a feed mill. That's a sales job. It's not meaning you go in there and tell them a great story and it's not, you're not delivering on it, but you do have to convince them that, hey, this is where you should spend millions of dollars, or I should hire more people for my department, or, let's expand into a market. When I wanted to put a new product on the floor at the feed mill, you had to go sell the production manager because they did not want to put more products on the floor. They wanted one product on the floor, and so I run into that frequently, because what'll happen is when I do these, I do some training, they'll say, well, we want our tech service people in there. We want maybe our operations managers to be in there. And frequently I do the interviews and I interview them, and or a lot of times, especially like researchers, PhDs and whatever. And I get it. They're like, well, I don't really do any selling. I say, oh, what do you do? And they, well, I help the customer understand this, this, and this. And I said, well, that's part of the picture of selling to the customer. In some cases, you're a very, maybe even a more important part than the salesperson themselves. And I would give you an example of equipment. The first piece of equipment a dealer sells is usually the salesperson convincing the customer to buy it. The second, third, and fourth is based on the farmer's experience with the parts and service department. Tractors are going to break, you're going to trade them in. Because of a good service and parts department, you're going to come back again. If they got a terrible parts and service, you're going to go to a different dealer. I don't care how good the salesperson is. And so, you can imagine there's not a lot of parts guys who say, hey, let's go do sales training. And some do, but most of them are kind of like, why am I here? And so I try to, along the lines of what you just mentioned, they're selling. They just don't understand it sometimes, that they're a huge element of that. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the customer service team
Sure.
is somebody that needs to be in sales. The managers need to be in sales. Like you said, the tech support needs to be in sales. And so that's really why I wanted to bring you on, because a lot of my listeners are ag professionals. Not all of them are in sales, but I would say
Sure.
the majority of them are in a role where they're working with a client.
Sure.
And so I just want to talk about like the importance of this, and kind of the process that you teach in these shops of like,
Sure.
why is it important to be really intentional with your conversations? And so maybe we can just kind of dive into that a little bit more of like, why is going through training like this so important for not only your reputation, but for your personal and professional development too? Would you like to speak on that just a little
Sure.
bit?
Absolutely. And this is easy for me because I in the Gallup strength, I know you're a big assessment person, and I am as well. I do versions of different, there's hundreds of them out there. I love that you talk about one of yours. They're very helpful. They're typically all good. It's good for different reasons. But I years ago I went through the Gallup Strength Finders when that all kind of swept through the industry. And one of my strengths, one of my 34 themes is learner and ideation. And I love to learn. So early on, I tell the story of my first day in sales. I had been an office manager, basically, is what it was. They called it a business manager, but I managed all the accounting and the purchasing and merchandising. And then I went into sales. And the day I went out there, I didn't have a clue. And so I'm like, I told them I didn't want to move. I wanted to be a salesperson. And they're like, okay, you're a salesperson. Go ahead, sell. And I'm like, well, there's got to be training on this. And my boss, he had a set of 8 tracks. And I mean, it was a joke then. This was 1994. I mean, it was a joke then. And it's, he pulls them out. He's like, here's some information. I said, come on, there's got to be something better than that. So he goes in, he gets out some cassette tapes of Brian Tracy. And that's how I learned to sell, was listening to those tapes going down the highway while I was doing my thing. And then I found the free support system at the library where they had a huge resource of, Zig Ziglar and Tony Robbins. And I just kind of like, I don't know how to sell. So I'm just going to, I guess, listen to people like that. Started reading some books. I was always much better at listening than reading. And so that's kind of how it developed. And then later on got into some sales training. But people have such a misguided or bad view of sales. And this is the reason I think it's so important to go through this, is that you connect with somebody that knows it's an absolute required profession for any business, because nothing happens until a sale's made. You don't make anything until somebody sells something. You don't collect any money until somebody sells something. And you and I, that left a company that had sales on the books no matter what, we understand that now, because you left, and the very first day there was nobody writing you a check for this month's paycheck. You're just like, I got to create demand somehow. And you really do get a much deeper appreciation for how important sales are. But back to my learning experience, was there just wasn't the resources that there are today. And so I kind of was out there like, what do I do? Where do I go? And luckily our company was very big proponents of professional development. If you raised your hand, if you didn't raise your hand, eventually you'd get the training, but it wouldn't come as fast. But if you raised your hand and said, "Hey, I want sales training, I want leadership training, I want," that was a wonderful experience to have that as a resource. And I took advantage of it as much as I could. And then eventually, because the contract companies didn't have ag experience, they would put the sales managers in the group. And this is kind of how my journey went from salesperson to being on my own entrepreneur. They would put us in the back of the room and say, you guys sit in the back as a sales manager and make sure the teacher stays on, just help them out. If they don't understand basis or margin or, what feed business is like, or the grain or the agronomy business, just help them out and make sure that everybody's getting what they need out of the class. Well, then eventually they just said, well, why don't we just get the sales manager certified? And so I eventually became an instructor as well. And for many years, it was kind of a sideline role. You do your job as a manager, and then all of a sudden there's a group that you got to go do we had a pretty lengthy program. It went on for a while, all internal, but yeah. So, I mean, but you see the transformations when people go from selling is, some kind of schmoozy art that nobody knows about, or they're born that. That's, he's a born salesman. You hear people say that. And they go from that to understanding there's a process. You can get better at it. You can do skills. It is an art form to some extent, but there's skills that you can learn and put into practice and get better at them, like a sport or anything else.
Yeah, I think that when I look back to my very first year in sales, I didn't really know what I was doing. And I stumbled a lot. And I think that if I had had some kind of sales training, intentional sales training, I would have had a lot more confidence. I wouldn't have said some really stupid things. And I probably would have had a lot more sales. And so there is a power. And that's why I think I'm going to name this podcast episode, Sales is Not Slimy, It's a Superpower.
Yeah.
Because if you truly have the understanding of what this can do for you personally with your confidence, with your reputation, and professionally with the skills that you're sharpening and your financial standings, it's going to be a game changer for you. And I remember going through my very first legitimate sales training, and I was probably 6 years into my professional career. Wow. So I had gone 6 years just kind of winging it and looking at those around me and seeing some sales professionals who were a little bit more seasoned and kind of just doing what they had done. And obviously they were doing things in a lot more old fashioned, right? So we've learned a lot and come a long way in the sales process. And we don't have to be used car salesmen anymore. And that stigma is still kind of hanging out there of, oh, you're a salesperson, you want one thing, this is the exact type of personality you must have, and this is, the sliminess that comes with it. And I hated being known as a sales representative because I didn't want that association. And so I said, I've got to do something different. And I actually brought it up to my manager, and I'm like, can we go through a sales training? And of course, I was the youngest and I was the only female on the team. And so they were all kind of crossing their arms and saying, no, we've been doing this for 20, 30 years. We don't need sales training. Kacee, what are you doing? Hush her up, Right. And we ended up doing a sales training, and we're walking in and the sales trainer's asking these questions, and what I would call seasoned professionals in the room did not do well. The answers they provided, the solutions to some of the conflicts, they were stumped. And I think they were a little embarrassed. And not that I want to put somebody in a defensive position or make them feel less than, but it really proved my point that we were way behind the times in our strategy. Right. And if we wanted to keep up with the type of technology that we're selling, the type of solutions that we're selling, our sales process needed to match that and align with it. And so it was really cool to see some of the old dogs learn some new tricks and finally say, oh, I can make more money if I stop doing what I've been doing for the last 40 years. It was a really cool experience.
Well, and I think they also, a couple of things that kind of chime in with that is customers have always been getting smarter. And today they're a lot smarter than they
Mm.
were. And I don't know, maybe smarter is the wrong word. It's more educated on the whole process. And companies, you know them, there's companies that are bypassing some of the traditional routes. So we have some internet-based companies, we have companies that are doing stuff direct to the market, there's software companies that can go straight to the farmer. So the role of a salesperson used to be come around and tell about your products and inform them. Now you're kind of, not necessarily the sage on the stage. You're the guide by the side. That's the speaking thing, is you're guiding them on their purchasing decisions basis what you know as to be true and to be best for what their operation is, versus, coming around and telling them. They probably, in a lot of cases, they may even know a lot more than you do as a salesperson, which still shouldn't intimidate someone if you know the skills of selling and you know how to approach that scenario. And many people like you and I, when we started out in the beginning, we had no big advantage to working with us. We didn't have the technology information like agronomy or nutrition, and we didn't have the selling skills. So it was, but you keep learning, you keep improving. And as long as you adopt that mindset, and I always tell people, you never really graduate from sales school. There's no diploma. And there was companies that I've worked with in the past, have been around. They thought, well, we sent them to a one-day school, they should be trained. I'm like, no, that's informed on how the process is. The training comes when you take that and actually ingrain it into your, through like stuff like your coaching and developing them along the way and making them understand how to make those decisions, how to ask those questions. And so I think as salespeople, we have to make sure we continuously improve with the market. And I saw plenty, just like you did, plenty of people who didn't stay up to date, and they became antiquated way before they had to. I mean, it wasn't like, at 55, you're not physically unable to sell differently. I mean, there's, just because you're older doesn't mean you can't ask questions and continue to dig and still prospect and go down these, it's just, they get to where they're comfortable, and then they stop hustling. And if they're allowed and they're not held accountable, it goes that route. But yeah, I get into audiences with a lot of the, 20-year, 30-year, and several ways to deal with that. Can't cure it all, but you can certainly bring out the fact that if their sales results are knocking it out of the park, then, okay, but I'm betting that some of them need to be there because their sales aren't meeting what the expectation is. So yeah, it's a struggle sometimes to get people to think they need to be there, for sure.
Right. And this is not me knocking seasoned sales professionals by any means, because I think that they have an advantage that I always envied. And that advantage was they were the trusted advisor. They had been working with these clients for so long that they were able to anticipate a lot of needs. They built the trust. They built those personal relationships. I mean, they knew the names of all their kids. They knew all the
Sure.
different equipment that they owned. And so there is a really cool thing that comes with having that long-term relationship. But what
Right.
I always saw coming from the new perspective and the new, young person on the team, I was able to look at things through a lens that maybe had gotten pretty cloudy for them, right?
Oh,
Like you said,
sure.
they got really
Absolutely.
comfortable. And so they didn't have to push a new sale. They didn't have to introduce them into something new because it had this consistent
Sure.
income. They knew what to expect, things like
Yep.
that. And, I remember my first job out of college, which I referenced my first career job, but this was my first job out of college. And I
Right.
was working at the parts counter at John Deere. And of course, the youngest person in the entire dealership.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I did not have the experience, with working with equipment other than operating what was on our farm. And so, of course, when someone came in for a part, they were in a hurry, they were rushed because something broke down and they wanted in and out. And
Yeah.
so they didn't really want to work with me. They wanted to go to some of the older people that were at the parts counter because,
Sure.
oh, they know what I'm working on. I'm just going to go over there. And there would be a line behind the parts manager's computer because everybody wanted to work with them. And
Yeah.
I realized at that point, I don't have to have every single piece of equipment memorized. I don't need to know all the things about everything. I just
Right.
need to know how to ask really great questions.
Yeah.
And what got people moving from the parts manager's line to my line was they realized I was really fast at the computer and I was able to look up parts way quicker
Sure.
because I was a little bit more tech savvy and I
Yeah.
was really great at asking questions. And so even though I didn't know that there was a serial number break between a new style 4020 and an old style 4020, and one had hydraulics up top and one had hydraulics on the bottom,
Yeah.
I knew that I could ask those questions and say, okay, what's the serial number? I don't know what the serial number is. Okay, are your hydraulics here or are they down here? Are the shifters here? Or are the shifters there? And so
Sure.
I started asking really great questions and I was able to find them that part just as quick as the parts manager. But he was really quick in the end portion of that. And I was really
Right.
quick at the beginning portion. So we kind of equaled out. And so
Yeah.
when I started to figure out what worked for me and how could I use my skill set and my experience to my advantage, it, kind of equaled out the playing field. And so I did things really different than the
Well,
seasoned professionals, but I still got the job done.
yeah, and I think it's like your, I use the term of your superpower. If you take Superman, it's the Man of Steel, and everybody's got their, the web or whatever their Batman's. I don't know. He's got a computer, I guess, is his superpower. But and I just asked somebody, what do you sell on? What do you hang your hat on? Is it your technical expertise? Is it? But there's a lot of them, a lot of different avenues, and when we go through those, because I did the same when I left in the office and went out in the territory. I did an animal science degree that had been outdated for 5 years because I had a break between college and I was in the service for 5 years. And so everything had become computerized when I got out. And so all my learning was basically antiquated. And anyway, so when I went out, I went out and I asked my customer, I said, I got to go see my dealer. I need to see some customers. And I started, because I didn't know how our products were even used. And I got the same training, go sell, go find some farmers and sell them. And so I went out to my dealer and I asked him, hey, I got to go see him. I started asking questions. How do you use these products? What's good about them? If I found competitive products, I asked a lot of questions about that. And by the time I got to about the 15th or 20th person in a couple of weeks, I kind of had a pretty doggone good idea of how these products were used by most people. And then I started bouncing those questions off dealers. And then the dealers had hundreds of customers that were coming in. So I was getting all that information by simply asking some decent questions. And I asked people to go find those people. And then the next area is make sure you're learning from them as to what works, because your superpower as a salesperson is that you go farm to farm to farm, dealer, retailer, whatever, company to company, all day long, every day. And you learn what's working and what's not working. I got to ask more about, as a feed sales guy, I got to ask more about shavings because they knew I went to other dealerships that sold shavings. And apparently shavings is a pretty important thing in a dealership, especially if you got a lot of horses and show animals. And so my point was, I couldn't be a gossip. I can't go, hey, here's what Bob or Mary or Joe and Sherry are doing. But I can say, here's, a lot of people are using this company, or a lot of people are using that company, or I haven't really heard anything about this company. I've never heard of them. And so what it does for you is you become a resource of information. And you may not know exactly, because I didn't know exactly how great some of these products were, or who could diagnose animal diseases in a sick animal. I didn't know if they were the greatest or the worst. I just knew they did it. And I knew where they could get some answers. And that connector role was one of my, became one of my strengths of asking more than what I learned from how to sell my products. I certainly had to do that first. And then that other stuff came later on. But that's where you become that trusted advisor. Is you don't necessarily have to be the smartest nutritionist to sell feed or nutrition products. It's good, be on that journey, but they're also looking for a whole lot of other aspects. Sometimes they're just looking to, where's my truck? Yesterday a team was trying to figir out about ionophores in horse feed. And how they can explain that. I mean, for them, the secret to selling is going to be how they're going to explain that to their horse customers, because they're making beef feeds in that same operation. And so I think that's a thing for salespeople to think about, is look at it as, what's your brand and what are you known for? And I used to look at this and think, well, I'm not some marketer. Like I heard about the brand, what's your personal brand, many, many years ago. Mostly it was referred to, how do you climb the corporate ladder? And I didn't really like it. I didn't like the concept. And so, but in getting out into the independent ag world, like we are, you need to have a brand, a reason for somebody to pick up the phone and call you. And so it started to develop. And then I realized, we all had brands as salespeople. Your brand is, there's the brand promise from the company. I always tell people, what is Coke and Pepsi and Ford and Chevy? What does the marketing team say about their products? Oh, they're great. Of course, no marketing company says, we build some nice trucks, some poor looking cars, and, some cars do well. And I mean, they all say great things about them. So we kind of tune out that. And what we really realize is the brand is, when you pick up the phone, you call the CSR, the customer service rep, and they either are nice to you or informative, or they go to the parts department and they're good on the computers or bad on the computers, or they're really good, but it takes forever to get in. Of course, we got doctors that are that way. They're great doctors. They're the best in the world, but you can't get a hold of them. You can't get an appointment. So I think those become your brand. I guarantee you, if your trucker drives over somebody's dog, that will be your brand. You're the brand of the company that has bad truck drivers. And, we did have that once. I mean, it's hard to get over that once, you're like, hey, but we make great products. Well, yeah, but your driver, stuck the auger through my side of my barn, and so we have those brands as salespeople. Do you answer your phone? Do you get back to people? Do you follow up on their, invoicing questions? I don't know what it is about invoicing. We struggle in ag just to get our bills straight. And so that's a big help, that salespeople can be a differentiator, instead of saying, call the marketing or accounting department, figuring it out for them and getting back to them and fixing it. So those are some aspects I think that chime in with what you were kind of going down that path as well.
That's such a good point. One of the things that you touched on there a second ago was climbing that corporate ladder. And so I want to talk about how the working genius ties into this. And
Sure.
I think I talk about it in every episode, but
yeah,
so many people become a salesperson and then they get really good at sales. When you align your skills to how you approach your sales position, let's just say that as a salesperson, you start your approach in your sales process from, let's just say, my position. So I'm a wanderer and discerner. I thrive in the discovery sales of,
sure.
or the discovery phase of sales. So asking questions, building the relationship, helping identify needs. And then let's just say somebody who's different than me, they are an enabler and tenacity are their two geniuses, and they approach sales through the lens of that. And so
Sure.
they kind of skip over the discovery phase. They kind of skip over the how do I solve their needs, but they're like, I will see it through and help you come up with a solution, and I will step in and ensure that your needs are met. So both types of people can be successful salespeople. They get to the position where they're getting noticed and their managers are like, we're going to promote you and I'm going to make you a manager now and teach other people how to sell. And then they get into the sales manager position where they're trying to teach other people how to sell. Where the gap may be is, as a sales manager now, if your geniuses were wonder and discernment and you're trying to teach a tenacity and enablement genius how to sell through your lens, you're going to fail them as a salesperson. They're going to get burnt out. They're going to think they're not a good salesperson, but then you're going to also start to get burnt out because you're not feeling like you're successfully leading your team. Turns out you don't want to be a people manager. You were really great at sales because you honed in on your craft. And now all of a sudden you got this big promotion. You're doing a different type of work and you're wondering why you hate this new role. Well, it's because you're doing a different type of work through a different type of lens now. And so I always like to not caution people on, but just bring awareness to, oh, you got promoted. Is it a different type of work? If it is, you need to probably look at it through a different perspective or through a different mindset and kind of rearrange your approach. And then having that awareness of the people you're supposed to be managing and training, and knowing that they are going to go about it in a different way than you are now. And so if you're getting promoted, or you've, kind of moved into a different position because you were so good at your last one that people want to move you up this ladder, or
Right.
laterally even, and you kind of find out that you're struggling, that may be why. And
Yeah.
so there's nothing wrong with staying in the position that you feel confident in, you have honed in on your craft, you have, been successful with building relationships with your clients. It's not something I'm saying turn down the promotion. I'm just saying be really aware of what type of work is going to change for you when you move positions.
Yeah. Oh, we could do another podcast interview on that one. And we probably should, because it happens so often. And part of the reason is exactly what you said. Well, you're good at sales, so just teach people to do what you did. And that's why we promote people. And there's a couple traps that happen. The first trap is what you just described, which is do what I did and you'll be successful. Everything I did has to work. Well, first of all, some people can't pull off what you did. In other words, you had the passion for learning and understanding so deeply with your customer. Somebody else might not have that passion. And so then they go out there and they try to imitate, they try to be you, or it's just like somebody trying to be a comedian, like copy a comedian. You can't, it just doesn't come off right. You've got to hone what
Mhm.
is really your strength. And a good sales manager, to your point, is not necessary. I mean, they have to know the business, they have to know the job of the salesperson, but they have to, what they're ultimately doing is they're trying to get multiple different personalities to do a great job of selling. And that involves what you said. If somebody has a personality that's driven by one aspect versus another, forcing everybody into the stamp, like the old Dilbert cartoon where everybody's getting stamped, put out by the corporate image. You're going to be this. That works if you go through enough people and you say, hey, I'm going to terminate everybody that doesn't make it until, if you got enough people out there, great, but we don't. And so I think the better approach, and more often, if you get put into that role, is to understand that one of the traps is people can't do exactly like you. And I'll give you two great examples in public figures is Michael Jordan and Larry Bird. Great players that had an unbelievable work ethic and probably some born in talent, but they worked hard. They had an ethic. And I think when they went to coaching, I didn't read a lot about it, but what I understand is they were trying to get people to do the job like they did it, to be a player like they were. And it was a rare individual that can do that. And I'm sure they had, like I said, some hand-eye coordination. It was pretty darn good. But they didn't do so well as coaches because, and who better to coach you than the people that ruled the basketball world. And I think the same thing happens. And I when we call ourselves coaches, and this is something I learned about business coaching because I got out and I called myself a coach, and I think you have coaching in your title as well. And people are like, well, coaching, you should read the book by John Wooden, or you should read Bill Belichick's book. I don't know if he wrote a book or not, but when I look at those guys, we stole the name coaching from the sports world, but those are really general managers. Their job in life, they only coach maybe one or two people. Like they coach their quarterback maybe, or they have a couple plays and they coach that. They're mainly making sure that they got the right players on the team. They're getting resources from the company. They're getting good equipment. That's what, as the sales leader, the best thing you can be doing is greasing the skids. I call it greasing the skids. I don't know if that's the right terminology, but basically making it easier and easier for your salespeople to do the business and job that they're doing by bringing the resources of the company surrounding it. And that's a very different role than going out there and cold calling on a producer and diagnosing their agronomy needs. It's like those are two completely different things. Selling the company on developing a new production facility for 5, 10, or 20 million, that's a whole different skill than driving up and down. Those are the same principles, but your motivations and your immediate gratifications are much more drawn out. The second thing I think that really people need to think, because this is going to happen. Some of your folks out here, like, I want to climb that ladder and be out there. When you're in sales, and I use this kind of a great analogy. I use the org chart, company org chart. We all have them, and I show one up there on the board, and I say, everybody see this? This is a company org chart. It's a generic one. It's got the CEO of the board or whatever. And I said, if you really want to be a smart aleck in your next meeting, say, hey, where would you put the customer on there? And then I flip up another slide that shows the salesperson as the center point with the company above him or her, and then the customer below them. And I said, this is what I view you as a salesperson. You are the quarterback of the process. You bring all the resources. They're all designed for you to do your job. That's a lot of support. If you need computer work, there's somebody helping you. If you need finance or accounting help, there's somebody to help you. Everybody is designed to make the sale and support you, and you're bringing that to the customer. When you become a manager, you're no longer the focal point. You're also no longer on the stage getting the awards at the meetings. Like, we're not clapping for you. You're in the sidelines. You're in the shadows in a sense, and you need to let your people be in the spotlight. There are people who are good salespeople who can't do that, and they shouldn't. And I think, to your point is, don't be afraid to go back to that. If you get into management, you don't like it, realize you were very successful as a salesperson, and maybe you just thrive on the rewards, the immediate satisfaction, and the commission, and whatever it is else that you really enjoy. So sorry, I got off on a tangent there, but there's some thoughts.
Those are two really great examples. And I'm so glad that you shared them, because I think you're right. Same thing with coaching, right? Most people view coaching as someone who's going to tell you, here's the exact same thing that you need to do because it's what I've gone through.
Right.
But it's really not it. People who are able to have that awareness around, these are your skill sets, this is your past experience, this is your season of life, here's all the puzzle pieces that we need to take into consideration, and here's the best route for you, and I'll help you on that journey. Right. But I think so many people just think it's this cookie cutter thing with everything, not just sales, but everything. Oh, you want to be in sales? Here's the path to do it. You want to be in marketing? Here's the path to do it. And that's just not true. And that's why I always say, even if it's not working genius, it takes some kind of assessment or do some kind of exercise that allows you to figure out what the best method for you is.
Sure.
And if you're not sure on what that method is, I offer this thing called a career audit. And it's not necessarily, I don't really love what I do, so help me move forward into something else. A career audit is where you and I look at all the puzzle pieces you have going on. And if it makes sense for you to stay in your role, how do we make this the best possible experience? So we take in all of your skills and we make sure that we're communicating that with our managers. We're making sure that we're doing our work through the lens of the geniuses that you have and really make the best of what your situation is. Or if maybe you're not doing the right type of work and things are misaligned, how do we get you doing types of work that are aligned with your skill set, with your experience, with your culture, with all the other pieces that are, something you can take into consideration. And so if that's kind of where you're at, feel free to reach out to me. I'll put a link in the comments of this episode on how to learn more about doing a career audit. But I think it's so powerful to bring a third party who's not emotionally invested in your role or in your life to help kind of find that perspective, guide you in a way that, oh, maybe I hadn't thought about that before. And so that's why I love the work that you're doing, Greg, because you're looking at the holistic view, not just here's how to do sales. It's here's all these other things to consider too. I think it's so important to have the work that you're doing in our industry too, because it's not cookie cutter. It is one of those things that isn't just for entry-level people either. This is continuing education. and continuing to sharpen those skills over time to keep up with the industry, to keep up with the expectations of our clients. And so I love the work that you're doing. But one of the questions that I have for you, Greg, is what kind of resources, trainings, tools are you using for your personal and professional development?
Sure. So I would tell you there's a couple of organizations that really came to light, and I'm going to fill you. But I do want to say too on your reference to assessments, and I applaud you for, and I appreciate that you're bringing the working genius into it, and assessments are great, and I get frequently asked because I use DISC, and it's a very common one that people can use, and there's reasons I use that. I won't go into that, but I use that, and the part that I like the most is that when people go through it and realize that they are wired a certain way and that there's not a born salesperson, or there's not a right or wrong way. Some people say, well, which one of those profiles makes the best salesperson? I said, well, the one that can sell from the center of the crosshairs, the one that can identify the person who's maybe in your working geniuses. There's not one that's generally a better salesperson. It's the one who can identify the other person and say, okay, this person needs a lot of data. This one needs a lot of reassurance and needs
Yeah.
connection. And this one needs a lot of control. That's just part of their nature. They don't, because I get, as a person in my profile, in my personal life, I'll get, well, you just like to control a lot of things. And I do. That's kind of, it was nice to know is that's what makes me feel comfortable. And it's not a fault, or I'm not trying to control other people. I'm trying to control things within myself. And so it was really inspiring when I start to see people who go through that. I know we do training for professional, and I do it to get paid because they go out and make sales in the world. But I also really enjoy when people, and I encourage people, use this in your personal life, to have your family go through these things if they're helpful for you. Most of what we do in sales and development, and even in yours, you're developing communication skills. So I do a session on negotiation, and everybody's like, well, I thought it was going to be about, I got this price, and I the art of the deal, and I'm going to squeeze you into a corner and not let you out. And I'm like, most of the negotiation is how do you communicate so that you can keep the conversation going and everybody kind of get what they need out of it, and then maybe what they want out of it. And they work not on just on amongst your customers, but they work with peers. So learn your peers' disc styles, or learn your peers, any of these assessments, learn what your peers are like, and then start to think about your family. I had one individual that as part of my training, I give them the do's and don'ts with the different styles. And one of the don'ts was something about the way that a person, never say this to a person in this profile. And one of the guys in the training says, this is why me and my father-in-law never get along. I said, what do you mean? He's like, he says this to me every time I meet him. He says this opening line sentence, and it's right in this thing. Do not communicate me with that style. I said, well, maybe you should show him that and say, it's not that I just don't like you. It's this, and I said, was this a real disagreement? Or is it just, she's like, oh no, it's a real disagreement. I just can't stand when he says this. And I'm like, well, he's wired away and you're wired away. It's not that he's doing something to potentially intentionally irritate you. But you need to understand that he's you're going to have to talk with him to understand that. And I've had people say, well, I want to change. I don't like my style. Somebody was in the D profile that was just the controlling and a little bit obnoxious, overbearing. And he's like, I don't like this. I really want to change. I said, well, you're kind of wired that way. But what's good about it is you can recognize what you're doing. So you can recognize the downsides of these strengths, because too much of a strength is a weakness. And so I think that's a very powerful thing. And I just throw that out there, that I think some of the stuff, I encourage people, go work at home with this stuff. Ask your teenagers and try to talk to them with these questions, open-ended questions. Try them out on your family and see how well they work. You'd be amazed at what you might find. And so anyway, I'll let you get back to, I didn't stray off too far off there, but these are great topics, and great for developing people as a coach.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because it doesn't matter what assessment you take. I recommend taking DISC and Working Genius and Enneagram. Those are my three favorites.
Sure.
And they're just all different layers that you get to kind of uncover and say, oh, this is why I do things this way. This is
Yeah,
why I feel this way about that. This is why I get excited when I get to do this type of work. And so they're all very valuable. And so I
absolutely.
think any kind of assessment that you do is just more awareness around who you are. But I think you're
Right.
so right, being able to know how to communicate that with others. That's part of what we do in that career audit is, here's your profile, now here's what you can do about it, here's how you
Sure.
can implement this into your work, this is how you can implement it into your marriage and planning the family vacation and working with your father-in-law, whatever the
Yeah.
situation
Yeah,
is.
for sure.
Being able to have a language of what that is and how to share it is the really cool part.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the second part of any assessment is, okay, great. That's how I am. Now, what do I do with that? How do I identify other people and their styles? And then, is there some key indicators that indicate this person really likes what they are? And so that you're communicating in their style. And I always say, it's like, don't just be who you are. They want you to communicate in their style. What they need is a lot of information or no information. There's the other side of that is, hey, I want you to know all the details. I just want to make the big picture decision. And so, but Kacee, you asked me about resources that I use. I will tell you that a big resource for anybody getting out into this world of independent, I encourage them to a couple different organizations. One is NSA. It's a very, very excellent development tool. I went through many years of Toastmasters to hone my speaking skills because I loved people that could really get up in front of a room and speak. And I always looked at it as a way to promote my products. I was asked to speak at all the trade shows when I went there. As a sponsor, we said we get a chance to speak a breakout session. But so I went through the Toastmasters, but NSA is, how do you monetize that? So how do you do what you're doing and what I do? That's kind of the organization. It's our trade association that does that. And there's a couple state, there's probably 30 state chapters. And then there's, of course, the national one. And there's just so many resources. And most people think of it as speaking, but it's also podcasts and webcasts and coaching and seminars and training. And once it involved a lot of those aspects before COVID, but when COVID hit, the virtual world opportunities and trainings in there just exploded with that. So those are one. The other one's ICF, which is the International Coaching Federation. This is another organization where we get thrown into roles because I was in the business when coaching came onto the scene. And so I actually had that as a title one time. I was a coach, and then I was a coach with supervisory responsibility. That was literally in my title, coach with supervisory. Yeah, that was like, we're not going to make you a manager, but you'll be a coach. Okay, you're going to be a coach, and then you're going to do their reviews and pay raises and all that stuff too. So I'm like, I don't understand the difference, but there was. Anyway, when that happened, we really didn't get any training on what a coach was. We read a few books, but we do, like I said, we'd read things like, what does John Wooden, who's a basketball guy for California, what does he think about coaching? And what does Tom Landry think about coaching the Dallas Cowboys in the 1960s and 70s? And you start looking at this stuff and you're like, this doesn't have anything to do with one-on-one coaching, trying to get somebody. Mm-hmm. And so there's an old saying that you lead, and I kind of adapted to it, but you lead people, you manage things, and that's kind of where it ended. And we used to speak of that because you're leading people, but I always think you lead teams like a football coach. You manage things and you coach the individual. So coaching is where if you're a company manager and you're coaching somebody, intentionally coaching them, there's a time for you to be the leader. You pick your head up and look downrange and say, we're going to allocate resources and people, and that's your job. And then there's managing assets where we need to move this truck over here and that over there. And then there's coaching, which is one-on-one, trying to help this person navigate their career the best that's for them. And so it's like a different, three different aspects of the same job that you do. And so that's something that I kind of picked up in my time working with ICF, International Coaching Federation. And then the third resource is making and having mentors, people like yourself and other people in the business that could, help me develop and grow. And I met them at different trade show events, you name it. I've had mentors out there that I've utilized before and have mentored me and helped me out tremendously. And I think one of them is coaching like yourself. I think that can shed some light into somebody's career and their life that can change the whole trajectory, from what it is. And that's inspiring for you as well as for them. So.
Those are all really great resources, and so thankful that you shared them. There are so many other things that I feel like we could go down. So we
Yeah.
may need like a part 2 and a part 3, Greg, but
Yeah, right.
I'm so
Exactly.
thankful that I'm so thankful you've shared some of these insights, and there's so much more when it comes to sales that we didn't even get a chance to touch on today.
Sure.
But if someone wanted to reach out to you, join one of your workshops, utilize you, for some sales trainings, where can they reach you? Where can they learn more about the things that you're doing?
Absolutely. The website's always the best. That's the first place people want to find you. And it's just gregmartinelli.net. Somebody had .com, believe it or not. He's in New York. He does artwork. So if you find art, that's not me. I am not an artist. Anybody that's watched me draw on a dry erase board knows that. But gregmartinelli.net. They'll find my phone number and everything there. Just reach out and give a call. Or there's we on the website. I think we both had our websites developed by some of the same people. There's a clickable link on there that'll put a calendar. A calendar pops up and they can select a time. If they don't want to put a call out, they can just click on there and it'll schedule a 30-minute discussion. And it's, have the discussion. It's if it's right fit, great. If it's not, I'll be the first to let you know. Because I think one of the worst things we can do as a small entrepreneur type operation is sign up the wrong account. So I'd love to have conversations with people just to discover where they're trying to, and I probably as often I point people in the direction of somebody that does it. So if I find somebody that's got a better connection with somebody like yourself, or had some other coaches kind of roles reach out to me, consultants that reach out to me, so I'll point them in that direction. But yeah, just reach out. I do a weekly. They can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm really at, probably the most, and then Twitter a little bit, not much, but I do have a Facebook thing, but I don't think people find me there very much, and it's probably good, but yeah, that's where they can reach me.
Yeah, that's right. So yes, if you're not on LinkedIn and you're a professional, I highly suggest you get on LinkedIn, because there are so many people out there that are producing free content, Greg being one of them, on here's 4 tips to help when you're feeling stuck in a sales
Sure.
conversation. Or here's, 3 things that you can do in a cold call. And there's just so many really powerful things that you can
Absolutely.
find on LinkedIn. So if you need help creating a profile or getting started, please reach out to me and I can connect you with some really cool resources. But another
Absolutely.
thing that you said, yes. So Allie Robbins actually built my website and yours. I forgot
Yeah.
all
Yep.
about that.
Yeah.
She's been on the AgriMinds podcast 2 or 3 times, and
Oh, cool.
she does some amazing work as well. And so, yeah, so that's just the power of networking, helping other people within the agriculture industry. I mean,
Sure.
there's so much overlap and intertwining, and there's so much power and so many people wanting to help you both personally and professionally sharpen your skills, hone in on your craft, and help you just become a better version of yourself in whatever way that looks. And so there are
Yeah.
people out there who really do have good intentions and really do want to help you be the best version of yourself. So, Greg,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for being on the AgriMinds podcast and for taking time to share a little bit about your story.
Well, you're very welcome, and I appreciate you having me on. It's been great. Enjoy it. Yeah, let's have part 2 somewhere down the road.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Greg.